Hello and welcome to Finally Friday. This chat session is run by EXARC, the Society for Archaeological Open-Air Museums, Experimental Archaeology, Ancient Technology and Interpretation. My name is Matilda Siebrecht, and today I am joined by two specialists from our EXARC community and abroad, focusing on archaeogaming. Justina Nauvinen is an archaeologist and game designer studying at the Southeastern Finland University of Applied Sciences. She is currently working on multiple projects, including the launch of a museum-focused game called Urajärven Kartano and concept design of an AR game for the village of Sysmä, and is currently leading a project for Rajamuseo, the border museum, where she is developing games for museum exhibitions. Her work focuses on creating a link between game design and archaeology and creating accessible and innovative platforms for museum visitors to interact with the past. Dr. Aris Politopoulos is an archaeologist currently working as a lecturer in archaeology of the Near East at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. As well as his research into Mesopotamian archaeology, he is a founding member of VALUE, which conducts research on the intersection of video games and archaeology. He is also a postdoctoral researcher at the Past at Play lab, which not only investigates how past civilizations may have culturally expressed themselves in play, but also how contemporary games deal with the past as a subject matter. So, welcome to both of you. I have a sort of quick question to start you off. So combining gaming and archaeology seems like living the dream for a lot of people. Definitely a lot of my colleagues in archaeology I know are very into gaming. How did you both become involved in this subject? Perhaps, Aris, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me as well. Yeah, for me it was a bit like a natural fit. I am a gamer. I've been a gamer since I can basically remember myself. And I've been spending too much time playing video games, especially during my PhD, maybe a bit more than I should. There is such a natural connection between video games and archaeology specifically, that I thought I might as well do something with all of this. I picked up a couple of things that I found interesting. I did a presentation at the Archaeological Forum back then at Leiden University. And all of a sudden there were 2-3 more people that were actually interested in this. And we decided to pursue it further and see if it's actually a place where we can do research. And it turned out that it was. So for me, it was very easy to sort of get to do it first as a hobby and then more and more as a research and outreach project.
Was it similar for you, Justina? Were you also a gamer?
No, this is very interesting for me because for the first time I have been an archaeologist, so this was my first biggest love and I haven't been playing games at all. But while I was working at the museum, I was getting interested in the graphic design, and while I moved to Finland from Poland, I decided that, well, I need to change my occupation, so I managed to get to the university, and the Southeastern Finland University of Applied Science was actually having a very interesting option to study in English. It was a game design, and in that case I understood that there is a quite clear link between archaeology and game design, and I decided to go ahead with that idea. So I'm almost finishing after 2.5 years of studying, and I am lucky enough to start my own game with the Urajärven Kartano with the museum, which is one of the oldest mansion museums in Finland. I'm preparing a very small mobile game there. And I also got a job in Finland, in my university, to actually lead a project with the Rajamuseo, so border museum, where we are preparing games for exhibition for the museum. I'm also recently got funding for the concept idea for the game Arheo Sysmä, which you have already mentioned. So this is how it is. I'm still not a gamer, but it's a very interesting subject.
And so, yeah, you mentioned you're still not a gamer. Do you think that it's important, for example, for people to have experience in playing video games? Have you sort of forced yourself to play a little bit more before starting research in this topic?
Well, to tell you the truth, for a game designer, it's important to play some games, but you don't need to go through all the game. So the most important is to play different games, at least till the level 2-3, to understand the mechanics of how the games works. And the other things are just the good ideas. So I do play now a little bit more, but I'm still thinking that it's much bigger fun to create games than to play them.
Coming from the other side, Aris, what do you think in terms of sort of experience of having played different games when starting research in this topic? Have you broadened out into different kinds of games, or is it still similar ones that you're playing?
I've definitely broadened up because when doing research specifically in video games, then you sort of have to broaden up because you have to have more experiences. But to get into the research or to understand how games can assist in archaeological research or archaeological outreach, you don't necessarily have experience in video games. It's more of an idea of playing in general. So even for people who don't play video games specifically, people play as a fundamental concept, right? So playing is kind of an inherent experience with everyone, and then playing video games is just another form of play. So if you start realizing that, hey, we can do something with video games, you need some adjustment to the digital environment, but everybody knows how to play.
I don't agree, because there have been done very interesting experiments about people who are actually not playing, have never been playing games, and they were introduced to play a game. And it turns out that, well, there is a lot of problems with people who have never been playing games. They just don't get the concept of how to play. Meaning that starting from understanding where to go with our character, how to use the keyboard, how to use the mouse, how to use even tapping. And it's really hard for people who have never been playing to start playing games.
You mean to play video games specifically?
Yes, well, basically, even like a simple 2D platformer might be very challenging for a person who has never been playing a game. And it's actually quite a lot of people like that. So it's an interesting thing that actually people who are not playing games in a game design industry, they are highly appreciated because they do think in a bit different way. Well, the thing is that the game is giving you just the false idea of having like possibility to choose. And the truth is that you don't have basically a lot of choices, and people who are not playing, they just don't go in the stereotypical way how experienced players will be actually interacting with the game.
Yeah, no, for sure. That is, of course, a good point. I mostly meant it in a more fundamental way, that people tend to understand play as a concept, not necessarily video games. Although I have to say, in my outreach projects at least, where we mostly do stuff with Minecraft, people tend to pick it up relatively easily, even people of older generations who might be a bit more hesitant. But of course, what you're saying is absolutely correct, that there is a necessity within the industry, a necessity for people who don't play games, because then indeed people who don't play games tend to think about it differently. And that also goes in game design as well, that people who don't play that much video games tend to design differently because they are not sort of hooked in the necessities of the industry.
Actually, sort of a bit related to that, I mean, for example, one of the typical examples of people who can't play either video games, but even, I guess, some of the more modern board games that are a bit more complex, you know, trying to teach your grandma how to play something that she's never played before can be a bit issue. Do you see a big difference in the ages of the audience members who engage with your projects? Perhaps Justina, you want to start?
Well, yes, there are a lot of differences in the age groups and the target groups, of course. First of all, for example, we can't introduce the games which are having, for example, complicated mathematical issues to the school children. We need to test our ideas every time on our target group, because this is what we assume, for example, in a game for Rajamuseo, which we are developing. We have been thinking that the player is supposed to be checking also the date of expiry. For that, we just decided that we're going to do some obvious date of expiry of the passport, which is, for example, like 1000 years of the year 1000. So obviously, it's like a 1000 years already behind the expiry day. But then we understood that not every children from the age of 7 to 8 actually understand the idea of time. So they do understand that 1000 is much smaller than 2000, but some of them don't know the numbers even. So we had to actually resign from that one part. Or at least we are still in a testing actually phase, so we are not really sure if we're going to have it, but rather we're going to be resigning from that one point.
That's an interesting point. The sort of things that might be indeed more normal for older generations is then for younger generations exactly a difficult concept to understand. You already mentioned, Aris, that actually your audience members seem to pick up Minecraft quite quickly. Do you also see a variation? Is it mainly younger people, older people?
It is interesting that there is some variation indeed in how people tend to pick things up. So especially we do a lot of museum setup projects, mostly using commercial games. So in our Minecraft projects, where we tend to do reconstructions of cultural heritage, and we create maps and people can come in and build specific cultural heritage for the most part, Of course, the younger generation knows how to play Minecraft already, for the most part, or if they don't, they know how to play video games better. So they are more keen on doing it. They are more ready to just jump in and do it, even if they make a mistake. And the older generation generally is either a bit more hesitant or a bit more scared of making a mistake, which is really interesting because the kids don't really care. They just want to build, they just want to play the game. And maybe they are interested in the content, but they are primarily interested in the play aspect of things. And it starts going the opposite as people get older. They are more interested in the content and less interested in actually building, or more hesitant in building. And then people are oftentimes, especially a bit older, in the like 50s, 60s, or even 70s, because our audience tends to be quite broad. People are more convenient, or are more actually at home when they sit back and watch other people build, or when they're just using the virtual reality experience, or just build for a few minutes just to get the experience of doing it and then leaving it as is. For the most part, the kids are the ones that are the champions of building and the champions of like putting the imagination in. But that creates a very interesting interaction between parents and kids, and grandparents and kids, or even grandparents and parents sometimes, because you see how they start discussing about the project differently, about the cultural heritage differently, how much the kids want to put in imagination, how much the parents are trying to sort of put in the information that we provide them with. And this creates a very interesting playground of constant interactions where oftentimes we as archaeologists are not even needed, as long as we have provided the information, because it's this knowledge interaction that's happening and it's being built up on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And you mentioned sort of a little bit about target audiences and how yours is very broad, I suppose, because you're not necessarily focusing then on a particular group. You're just kind of presenting the research and seeing who bites. Is that a fair assessment, or would you disagree?
Again, it depends a bit on the project. In this Minecraft project specifically, because we do them in museum spaces, or we do them in plazas, or in other public spaces in general. So we have a setup of different PCs, like 3 or 4 PCs, and we sort of take it from museum to museum, or from library to library, or municipality to municipality, and set up there. And people can come in and build the heritage of their own city, or of their own town, or their own province. But because they are so open, and they are often part of museums or part of festivals, these events, people come in as families usually, or come in as groups of friends. So it's either the audience that is present currently at a museum, or at a festival, or at an event, but these tend to be mixed audiences. So we try to design with all audiences in mind. So make the content and the supplementary materials accessible for kids, but also interesting for parents as well. The play experience, make it both like playful enough within Minecraft for kids to be free to build whatever they want, but also with certain constraints, so we don't lose focus of the goal, which is to build the cultural heritage of that specific location or province. And so it's not very easy to accommodate everything, but yeah, we're trying with the Minecraft events to serve a bit for everybody, so everybody has the opportunity to learn something through these events. When we're doing streaming or some other stuff, then it's usually geared towards a more younger audience, because generally younger audience is present in live streaming video games. But again, it really depends.
And so, Justina, I guess because your work is focused more for particular projects or for a particular museum, do you find that you do have to pick a target audience, or can you also keep it broad?
When we are creating a game, we have to figure out the proper target audience. This is the most important part of creating a game. Choosing a target audience for a museum and for commercial projects are two different things. For commercial projects, it's basically heavily related to the age group and how people are actually interacting in those age groups with the game. And in the museum spaces, we have to think about the age, but also about the educational aspect, ethical aspect, and then also about who is visiting the museum and what is the museum goal to achieve, for example, raising up the amount of visitors. So in that case, we need to really think about the actual visitors of the museum and what the museum is actually aiming for. So there is a lot of problems with that, because there are people who are going to the museum very often, and there are people who are going there only occasionally, and there are people also who are not going to the museums, and we have to think about how to engage all of those people. So for example, usually they are coming in pairs or with the families, and in that case we have to build a game which is enjoyable not only to play but also to watch. And then there is also a thing about the timing of the game. So we can't create a very complicated game in that case. If the museum visit takes more than an hour, it's usually coming with the very big exhaustion and people just don't want to play. So the games needs to be very fast, and they need to also be accessible for people who are having like different disabilities. Of course, we can't design a game which is totally perfect for everyone, but we have to try to be as inclusive as it's possible, with keeping also with the narration of the exhibition. It's kind of different way of designing than normal designing of the game and the commercial one. There is also one extra thing which I really do love for while I'm designing games for the museums, is that the monetization is not getting into that. Monetization is actually a big mechanics for the game, and I do understand that people have to earn for the game, especially if they are giving you for free. But in some games, especially hyper casual games, it went to extreme, and I don't think that it's ethical now, actually, how it goes. I'm really happy that the games for museums are more ethically friendly.
Do you see any changes in improvement or otherwise in how more popular games are being used to depict the past? Do you think they're able to balance the kind of authenticity and the kind of realism of the information that they're showing with, for example, wanting to make money and wanting to make these games popular? Aris, I know that you do a lot of work with streaming games and discussing how different games are played through the Value Project, I think it is.
One thing that we can say for certain is that people want to learn history or want to learn about the past through their games. We did quite a big survey this time last year. It was a global survey where an overwhelming amount of responses said that the players were actually very interested in, or at least somewhat interested in, learning about history through their game. So we know that people are interested in that, and we do know that games are not exploiting this necessarily, but video game designers and large game projects tend to use the past as a playground, as a digital playground to set their games in. Both because it's a nice place to set your play in, it's fun to play in the past, but also because people are interested in it. Now, to what extent these recreations of the past are accurate or authentic, or should they be, is of course the next level of the discussion. And that is a big one, both within the gaming world, but also within archaeologists who research video games or who use video games in their projects. I think that there has been change, especially from, let's say, the historical games that we had at the end of the 80s or the early 90s, when we saw a sort of an uptick in the first historical games, until now, both in terms of content, in terms of the actual historical information being present in the game, but also in terms of ethics and representation. So if that's the goal, then it is getting better. But we also have to keep in mind what Justina said, that a lot of these companies are in it for the money, especially the big AAA studios, Ubisoft and whatnot. They are multi-million or even multi-billion dollar companies. So it's a difficult discussion when it gets to that. You tend to see developers trying to shy away, for example, from politics in their games. And they tend to say, hey, people are trying to put politics in our games and we don't really want that because it's bad for business, is the truth. And even though there are political choices, there are ethical choices in their games. I would say that there is a significantly bigger improvement in independent studios and the indie games that are being produced, where there's a lot more creativity, there's a lot more engagement, and there you see how stories and games and narratives set in the past are actually thriving significantly more, and we're seeing different things being discussed, we're seeing different interpretations of the past being discussed. We see a much bigger involvement of scholars with indie studios because it's both easier for scholars to talk to independent developers than the AAA studios, and it's also easier usually for smaller companies to reach out because they don't have all these bureaucratic layers. So I would say if somebody actually wants to look at the newer things, the more interesting things that are happening when it comes to the gaming world and the past in general, I think the indie games are where the innovation is right now.
I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Justina?
Yeah, I do think that recently the quality of the games are growing, thankfully, especially with showcasing the different parts of the history. And the research is getting better, but at the same time, I have a feeling that it's still not deep enough. In my opinion, there's a lot of space to make it better. The storytelling is now in a game industry a big thing. But at the same time, for example, if you ask designers if they have been in the museum in the past year, they probably will say, like, yeah, once. So it seems kind of sad that game designers have problems with understanding past because they still have this feeling from the school that past is kind of boring and maybe not necessarily that fascinating as for the scholars. And I also noticed that there is a problem with the language, that there is still not enough common terms that can actually be understandable by the archaeologists and the game designers to find like the common platform, common place where we can speak about it. Quite often, scholars are using too hard language for game designers, and game designers are having problems with understanding why something has to be designed in that way, not in the another way. So indeed, it's getting better, and I hope it's going to be going better and better every time, but it needs a lot of work from both sides. Both the archaeologists and the game designers have to think about how to communicate properly to create good content.
I think that's a really good point. And actually, then you two are both coming from the perfect angle, really, because you're coming from the archaeology side and going into the gaming or the game design aspect. So I imagine that's probably given a very different perspective to if you had just come from a predominantly game-focused way. You mentioned already that games are sort of very engaging, therefore they could indeed be the perfect way for, I mean, you mentioned that scholarly research is quite often not as well communicated to game designers or is less easy to understand, not just for game designers, but for the general public. I think that that's a major problem in general in archaeological research, in my opinion. And so you could argue that indeed games is the perfect public outreach platform to try and encourage people to think about the past and what it involves, not just in a fun playing way, but in terms of finding the past interesting and seeing how cool it can be and all this kind of thing. Do you see an increased interest in the past or in the events from people who are participating in your different projects? Perhaps Aris, you want to start?
I do think that there is an increased interest in general in the past when people play with it. I wouldn't say this is necessarily something that's happening now. That's something that's been happening over time for as long as video games have been streamed and also have been set in the past, which is, let's say, for the last 20, 25 years, one already can see from games like Civilization, Age of Empires, and moving forward. People have been getting into the past in a way through these games. When it comes to our projects and what we're trying to do, of course, we would like to think that we are doing something good there. And over time, we have seen an increased interest in this, both from the public perspective and people who are finding out that, hey, there are actually scholars dealing with the thing that we like, games, and the past, the other thing that we also like. And there is also an increased interest from the scholarly perspective. So within at least sciences about the past, because of course there is already scholarly interest in the game studies and the game design research, but now more and more it's happening in the sciences of the past. So archaeologists are getting more interested in it, historians are getting more interested in it, and what do video games do for communicating the past, for thinking about the past. And you see this interaction happening in different spaces, in the academic classroom, outside in your bar. So I think there is something happening, and it is shown by the ever-increasing number of archaeogaming, either conferences, publications, outreach events, museums being more interested in incorporating games, other kind of outreach projects being more interested in incorporating games. But I think we still have quite a long way before this is something that not necessarily becomes mainstream from within the academia towards the outside or vice versa, but we have quite a long way until people appreciate the importance of video games in modern day popular culture. There is still a little bit of stigma on video games, I would say, not as much as there was in the 90s when I was growing up and people would scoff at you for playing video games. Now it's significantly more mainstream available. People play games on their phones, people play games on their tablet, on their PC, whatever. There is much more of a gaming culture, but there is still a bit of a stigma. And especially when it comes to academia, we have to get over it a bit more to be able to fruitfully appreciate and use video games in research and outreach. Because from a popular perspective, people already appreciate games quite a bit, I would say.
Yes, indeed. There is a lot of people who are thinking that games mean obviously only fun, nothing else. And indeed, in the commercial games, the way how you design the game, it means that you have to make the game fun for the audience. But for example, when it comes to the museum exhibitions, you can play against the rules because the game might be so frustrating, might be so irritating for the player that he will actually have a bigger immersion to your narrative design exhibition. It is actually very important. We have to understand that game doesn't necessarily means only fun. It might also needs education. It might needs inclusion. It means good storytelling. So there is a huge work which have to be done between archaeologists, museologists, historians to translate the scientific language into the popular culture, and game designers need to understand that, well, without understanding also the history, the games, even if they have only historical background, they are not fully done. And I think it's starting to be more popular now that the games are more into the historical backgrounds. So I hope that it's going to be growing, this idea. Plus, there is also one more thing. If you have a museum exhibition which you have invested in so much money, creating game is also pretty expensive, but it gives you one more thing. It is scientifically proven that if the visitor is giving flyers, if the visitor is seeing videos, if the visitor can interact with your exhibition, he learns more. About 6 different kind of publications should be shown to the visitor. He or she will not look, watch, play everything. But if he is presented with the variety of different publications, different interactive things at the exhibition, he will or she will learn more from it. So creating a game might actually be the form of having fun for children, for adults who would like to have a bigger immersion to the exhibition, and games are good in that. It also has been proven that people who are playing games are memorizing the historical facts better and memorizing them in a long-term memory. So there are only good things.
All positive. That's a good ending point, I think. I do have one final question. So you mentioned your projects you're doing already, but do you have any projects coming up or that have only recently started that you'd maybe like to tell us about? And also, how can the XArc community, those people listening in today, help, do you think, to make a difference in regards to those points that have been discussed today? Maybe Aris, if you want to start?
We just started the Streaming the Past project. Now we're just entered the 3rd week. The Streaming the Past project is our new outreach project funded by the Science Communication Agenda of the NWO. We've hired 3 amazing students from Leiden University who are streaming games and talking about history and archaeology 3 days a week, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. So if you go to streamingthepast.com, it will direct you to our Twitch channel and you can watch all the amazing content that's coming from there. Also, if you're in the Netherlands, we're still running the Past at Play Lab and we still need a lot of people to help us with the experiments on ancient board games. So if you want to play ancient board games, go to pastatplay.com and book a session, and I'm sure you're going to have fun with it. And I think for the XR community and for those people who are interested in video games and the past, I think the best thing to do is, if they are of course interested in the research component of it or in the outreach component of it, the best thing to do is to actually do it. It sounds a little bit too obvious maybe, or even counterintuitive, but at least in my experience and from the stuff that we've been doing over the last 5-6 years is that not everybody will immediately take you seriously when you try to combine video games with anything, because people tend to not find video games too serious. But there is so much research to be done. There are so many angles that can be taken, both from a research perspective and from an outreach perspective, that you can very easily find something that you would like to do and just start doing it or try it out and see if this is a research that you like pursuing further. It doesn't necessarily have to be, oh, is this game accurate or is this game true to history, because this is the thing that archaeologists tend to do for the most part in a way, right? We like to nitpick, and so we go into Assassin's Creed and say, hey, actually, this is not accurate. But video games have way more to offer than just being nitpicky about historical facts. They are one of the best mediums available for communicating to a wider audience and for thinking in different ways about the past, for telling different stories, for telling diverse stories, for telling more inclusive stories. So I would say just go out there and try it out and see what kind of crazy ideas you can come up with when combining video games and archaeology.
When it comes to me, well, the Urajärven Kartanon mystery mobile game is halfway developed, and I hope we're gonna be launching it soon, next month, I guess. Another thing that Rajamuseo just also started 3 months ago, so we are now in this phase while we are preparing first game and testing it and preparing like a paper mockups and blocking playable mockups and so on. So this is also starting. Sysmon, it's just starting, really just now. But my future project will be launching my own company, which will hopefully be making games for the museums. So go ahead and find heritagegamesstudio.com, and if you need some assistance or you would like to make a game for your museum, I am available.
Sounds excellent.